We're going to talk in this session about the Medicaid expansion, except I'm not going to mention any more. Delete Medicaid expansion from your vocabulary. We are all going to be talking about the Tennessee plan for reasons that I'll explain in just a moment, not because some of us wouldn't passionately prefer the Medicaid expansion, including myself, but that's not going to happen, and so the train that we need to catch is the Tennessee plan. The Tennessee plan was announced by Governor Haslam on March 27th. You may recall when we were together this time last year, the Supreme Court in the NFIB v. Sebelius case had said that it was upholding the Affordable Care Act, but that it was too oppressive on states for the act to require that they expand Medicaid to people below 138% of poverty, which is what the law did. And it said that if they didn't do it, they risked losing their existing Medicaid funding. In a statement that I think I have not seen commentators talk about, but to me, and particularly as a lawyer, with great respect for our system and for the Supreme Court, was a source of great sadness and discomfort. The Supreme Court said that compelling the states to do the Medicaid expansion would be the equivalent of saying to someone, your money or your life. And the reason why that was so painful is, of course, we know the realities of the current system for people below 138% of poverty who are uninsured and other people who are uninsured, is that the system says that to them every day, your money or your life. But it's not a metaphor. It's not a simile. It's not a comparison. It's not a turn of phrase. It's brutal reality. And that 7 justices of the Supreme Court, for all of their integrity, their concern for our country, their intellectual brilliance, could be so far divorced from the realities of the people that the Affordable Care Act is concerned about, that they could use that expression unselfconsciously to express concern for the states, abstract entities, and their political leaders at the expense of the people whom the Medicaid expansion is supposed to help, is, I just think, a terrible statement about the reality in our country that you can be privileged and insured and not understand what it's like to be disadvantaged and uninsured. So when the Supreme Court, and thank God I'm in a room full of folks who do get it, and are concerned about doing something about it. And so a year ago we were with colleagues in other countries, in other states, working desperately to make sure that our state adopted the Medicaid expansion now that it was an option rather than an obligation. Still a moral obligation, no longer a legal one. So there was great anticipation when Governor Haslam on March 27th, a few days before Easter, spoke to a joint session of the General Assembly and said, I'm not going to do the Medicaid expansion, but I've got a better idea. It's called the Tennessee plan. And the Tennessee plan involves taking the federal Medicaid dollars and using that to buy people private coverage through the exchange, or what we're now calling the marketplace. You will recall that the way that the law was designed was that people above poverty who are uninsured would get a premium tax credit on a sliding scale that would make premiums affordable, up to 400% of poverty. And to me that's very telling that when the experts studied what it would take to be able to make insurance affordable, they realized it had to be subsidized all the way up to 400% of poverty. That's how unaffordable health insurance has become in this country. So what we are now faced with in those states that don't do Medicaid expansion, because the other half of the picture was for people below poverty, and in fact up to 138% of poverty, those folks would get their coverage through Medicaid. Why? Because it was less expensive for the state and federal government, and because the insurance industry didn't want to fool with poor folks. Can't make any money off of them. So the deal that was made was the insurance industry would get to cover the people with subsidized premiums above poverty up to 400% of poverty through the marketplaces, but below poverty, those people would be reliant on the Medicaid expansion. So when the Supreme Court pulled that out of the bill and made it optional, we are now confronted with this anomaly, this cruel injustice, that people below poverty will get nothing and will remain uninsured, and people all the way up to 400% of poverty will, as they should be, get subsidized private insurance. I don't begrudge the folks above poverty who are getting that subsidy. In my view, everybody should have coverage. And if they need a subsidy to make it affordable, I'm for that. I just think there's something totally upside down about subsidizing it for the people who are better off and giving nothing to the people who are poor. But that's where we are, because we've always known, those of us who cared about this issue, that it was only going to happen in Tennessee if Governor Haslam supported it, and supported it fairly aggressively. And that's because the Tea Party caucus in the State General Assembly is so strong, and the fear of Tea Party advocates subjecting sitting members in the Republican Party to being primary is so strong. Those fears were so great, that perception of grassroots strength on the part of the Tea Party is so strong that it would take gubernatorial leadership to bring the legislature along. So, on March 27th, the governor said, I don't like Obama either, I don't like Obamacare much, I'm going to come up with something better. We're going to buy everybody into the exchange. And so in essence, we're going to use the Medicaid dollars to do what the premium tax credit does for the people above poverty. It's going to make it possible for them to buy coverage through a so-called qualified health plan, or QHP, in the marketplace. He said, I'm going to ask the federal government for permission, known as a waiver, to do this. And so tellingly, those of us who followed that, it was the Tea Party that broke into applause during that speech, because they knew that it would be an uphill pull to actually deliver on the Tennessee plan. So where are we now? We are for trying to get the Tennessee plan to yes. Not because we think it's so much better than the Medicaid expansion, but because it's the only way of getting coverage for folks in Tennessee. It is not going to happen if we just insist on the Medicaid expansion. It's got to be through the Tennessee plan or nothing at all. There are two hurdles to yes. One is because this is not something that is provided for explicitly in the law, it's got to be done with a federal waiver. The governor has to get federal permission to do this. The other larger hurdle is the governor has to get backing the state legislature. Dang, that's irritating. Sorry. Okay. I just appreciate y'all not booing. That was awful. People I work with would be particularly amused, since I'm such a technological incompetent, so I try to tout it up, and that's what I get. So we're going to use premium assistance. The governor outlined he couldn't just say, I'm going to take the federal money and use it to buy people private insurance. He had to have, several features in it that would make it different, and so he ticked those off. Another is payment reform, just amongst us girls. He already can do that, just amongst us girls. It's kind of funky because literally the state doesn't pay healthcare providers in Medicaid, which is what he's talking about. We pay the managed care companies, or HMOs, and they pay the providers, and they negotiate the payments, and they can reform it all they want to. But that's just going to be our little secret. We're supposed to all talk about that part of the governor's plan. That's copacetic. We're fine with that. But obviously, getting permission for something he doesn't need permission for should be fairly straightforward and easy, and I think he'll get permission for this thing that he doesn't need permission for. The President has said, or rather CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which is part of HHS, which is headed by Secretary Sebelius, they've said, we're going to approve premium assistance. They put out what are known as frequently asked questions, FAQs, to the states 2 days after the governor's speech on Good Friday, March 29th. And they said, we're cool with premium assistance. We intend to approve waivers from a limited number of states, but there aren't that many states that are trying to do this. So, fine, no problem with premium assistance. But if you're going to take Medicaid money to buy people coverage through the exchange, those folks we still regard as Medicaid beneficiaries, which means they are entitled to the safeguards that are built into the law for people who are on Medicaid. That means because it's a program for poor people, you can't charge them the sky in terms of how much their cost sharing is going to be, premiums, co-payments, deductibles, okay? There won't be premiums, but there will be co-payments and deductibles. In the governor's plan, he has said he wants folks to have some skin in the game. Now, actually, if you look at the size of the co-payments he's charging, he would charge them the same as if they had 250% of poverty, and keep in mind some of these folks have incomes of zero. So I think at some point you don't just have skin in the game, you've been skinned. But anyway, that's his thing. He wants to waive the cost-sharing limits, do away with those, so they can charge a lot. Doesn't want to provide the minimum benefits that are required in Medicaid. Those are actually, given the protections in the Affordable Care Act, those are relatively modest that he would have to add. It's no big deal. And doesn't want appeal rights to be as robust as they are for people who are on Medicaid. And those are the things that he wants to eliminate. And those are the sticking points. And we'll come back to that in a second. The much larger hurdle, and this is what causes some cynics to think that maybe the first hurdle is the one that the governor would like to get hung up on for political reasons. The much larger task is to get the legislature to approve this. And for that to happen, the governor has to be persuaded that the votes are there in the General Assembly. And GOP lawmakers, in order to give him the high sign that they'll support it, have to be convinced that they won't be primaried by the Tea Party, or that if they are, they will be able to survive that. So that's the really big task before us. As I indicated, the feds have said, you know, state premium assistance is fine, but trying to do away with consumer protections, that's a deal breaker. And so what that means is that Governor Haslam will get the permission only if he takes those provisions out. Now keep in mind, and John and I are going to talk some more about the money in this, we're talking about billions with a B in federal aid to the state, money into the state budget, money into local government budget, larger tax revenues, money into the healthcare infrastructure. And then you talk about these waiving the cost sharing requirements. Not only are they ill-conceived in terms of health policy to make, you know, create insurance and then say to the poor people, you have to pay enough for it, you won't be able to actually get it. That's not good policy. But apart from that, that is very small peanuts from a state perspective. It's budget dust compared to the amount of money that we're putting at risk if we don't take those provisions out so that we can get the federal dollar. Arkansas, this unique idea that no one else is pursuing, is actually a copycat of an Arkansas plan that had already been announced. Governor Beebe in Arkansas is a Democrat. He had a strong Republican majorities in his legislature. He crafted the so-called private option, which is basically the Tennessee plan on the other side of the Mississippi River. It's the Tennessee plan west. He crafted it so that Republicans could support it and not be in favor of Obamacare. That this would not be Medicaid expansion, it wouldn't be socialism, this would be getting people private insurance. It's expected that that will be approved by October the 1st. And significantly, the legislature, the Republican legislature, really came together to support it, including very, very conservative members who were persuaded by their constituents and by the governor that this was a moral issue. It was a matter of decency and financial security and health access for their constituents. And so they put aside their ideology to support this, and which I think is an example of where we need to go to make the Tennessee plan happen. But significantly, it didn't waive the consumer safeguards. Those are still in there because they really wanted to get permission, so they didn't load it up with a bunch of stuff that wasn't real important to the state, but that would make it unapprovable by the federal government. So unlike the Tennessee plan, it still respects those protections, and it's expected to get approval quickly. So what happens if we don't get approval and we don't go forward? The feds say that you can come in or come out of the Medicaid expansion, or in our case, Tennessee plan, at any point. And so, you know, if you're worried about Obamacare and creeping socialism, and you try this out, you don't like it, you can always drop it. If you don't want to come in January of 2014, which is when the law takes effect and when the dollars are first available, you can wait until later. Except, if you don't take it from the beginning, then the dollars that you would have gotten are gone forever. And there's 100% funding for the first 3 years, and it scales down after that by 2019 to 90% federal funding, 10% state funding. That's still a deal to die for from the state perspective. It's very generous. But psychologically, you know, this issue of, well, they're going to cut back on the funding. The feds have said, look, if at any point you don't like the deal, you can get out. But it's only the first 3 years that you're going to get, in the calendar years. I mean, they name them in the law. It's not just any 3 years. It's 2014, 2015, 2016. That's when the 100% funding is available. So if we don't take it, we are going to lose $2.8 million a day, $2.8 million a day in federal funding for every day that we delay doing the Tennessee plan. So you hear some people say, well, you know, maybe we won't do it this year, maybe we'll do it next year, kind of like, well, you know, the fact that somebody's got cancer and can't get care, well, you know, no big deal. But can you get your mind around the idea that it's $2.8 million in federal funds that we're foregoing?
So what if you quit on the last day of the third year? You've got 3 years of 100%. I mean, it's kind of like a bad date to me.
If you quit on the last day
of the third year, you're getting 100% up until then.
You can do that. Yeah. Now, I mean, the assumption is
we have nothing to lose.
The assumption is that you know, if people are on, the state understands what a good deal it is by that time, people will keep on doing it. But you're right, you can pull out at that point. So there's no downside risk. Unless you believe, unless you ideologically are convinced that Obamacare is spawn of Satan and that Medicaid expansion by any name is going to cause our teeth to rot, our hair to fall out, and all sorts of other bad things. Now what we're going to see is that our neighbor to the north, Kentucky, is doing a straightforward Medicaid expansion. Arkansas to the west is going to have Tennessee Plan West, and they're going to be getting the dollars. They're going to be getting the money. That's going to make an impact on our competitive relationship with them in terms of recruiting business, in terms of having a vital healthcare infrastructure. But we're facing, because the governor didn't push this through in the last session, we're facing a dawning calendar. There's been talk about maybe calling a special session. As you probably know, the legislature will come back into session in January, get serious in February about doing its business, and be gone by the early spring or mid-spring. The problem is, so the idea would be you call a special session in the remaining months of this year, and you call them. The governor can do that, but he has to say what the purpose is. So he says, I'm going to call you all into session. Please come back to Nashville. We're going to have a special session, and I'm going to ask you to vote on Obamacare. Doesn't sound like a good political plan to most people. Because the whole idea is you want to make it possible for the Republican legislators to do this without committing political suicide with their most ardent Tea Party supporters. And so, I mean, that's the reason for just calling it the Tennessee Plan, to try to insulate it from the bad karma of Obamacare. But the concern is that if there was a special session with nothing on the agenda except this, then people would show out trying to show that I hate Obamacare more than you do. Oh, no, I hate it even more. and that ultimately it would be difficult to get it through. So it looks like he's not going to call a special session. That also requires a great deal of backbone, a great deal of moxie and leadership on the part of the governor. So for a number of reasons, we don't think that's going to happen. Next year is going to be primary year, and the filing deadline is April 3rd. So the thought is, well, maybe he would wait until after the primary qualifying deadline for candidates. People would know they don't have opposition, and then they'd be okay. My concern there is that I'm worried that people are going to be asked to take the pledge, as they do now on the income tax, and we pledge you will have nothing to do with the evil works of Obamacare, but we'll see anyway. And then after that, we begin to approach the years when the 100% funding declines. That's not a big deal. It's still a cash cow for the state, but psychologically that's a problem. So we are looking at a calendar in which, I think the common wisdom among health experts is that at some point over the next 10 to 20 years, all the recalcitrant states, including the former slave states, let's just name it the way it is, will finally get on board and do the Medicaid expansion. But I have a great sense of urgency, and I know everybody in this room has a great sense of urgency about the lives that will be blighted or shortened for every day, every month, every year that access to affordable coverage is delayed. So I have a great sense of urgency, and I think in the immediate future, the path forward is challenging. But there are factors that favor it. It's still a great deal. Best estimates are that it will bring $10.5 billion in federal revenues into the economy. That's the Urban Institute's estimates. The governor has used more conservative estimates, and that's where I got the $2.8 million a day figure, because I think it's probably better to err in the direction of being conservative and not invite further controversy. But we're talking about a lot of money. The governor talks 6.1, Urban Institute 10.5, whatever it is. A lot of money. That generates jobs. It generates, according to the University of Memphis, 18,500 jobs. And it reduces the burdens on local government and on hospitals. For the hospitals, this is a matter of extreme urgency, because the Affordable Care Act, as you know, does any number of things beside expand coverage. It seeks to improve the quality of care and to improve the affordability of care. And part of improving the affordability of care and the quality is to set some fairly aggressive targets for reducing Medicare and Medicaid expenditures, particularly Medicare expenditures to hospitals, and linking that to quality performance. And so the hospitals are facing significant reductions in their Medicare and Medicaid funds that has nothing to do with whether the state does Medicaid expansion or not. And the deal that got put together when they were passing the Affordable Care Act was the hospitals said, we'll give up those payments in return for getting expanded coverage and reducing the burdens that we carry now by caring for people, granted not always in a timely way, usually at the end of life, but still the hospitals have significant uncompensated care burdens. By expanding coverage, they were going to make up for the loss of Medicare and Medicaid dollars. The state's decision not to do Medicaid expansion turned that into a huge bait and switch consumer ripoff for the hospitals. They bought one deal, but they got delivered something very different and costly. So they need to have either the Tennessee plan or something close to it and get those federal dollars in, or they're going to be losing a lot of money. Many people in this room are used to hearing the boy cry wolf from the hospitals over the years. Oh, we're losing money. Oh, we're losing money. Oh, we're losing money. I can remember when former Governor McWhorter, who started the TennCare program, said, I hear the hospital lobbyists come in here and they talk about how they're losing money, but I tell you, I'm just a simple country boy. That's the cue to reach for your wallet in the case of Governor McWhorter. I'm just a simple country boy. I'm not an economist, but all I know is that from where I sit in the Capitol, if I look out across the skyline in Nashville, and it's the same in other cities, and I see those big cranes, I know that's where the hospitals are. They're always building, and you don't always build if you're losing your shirt as fast as the hospitals say they're losing their shirts. And we're used to hearing that, except now, and in fact, Lieutenant Governor Ramsey has said something very similar, except that now they really are going to lose their shirts. And in fact, they're going to lose a significant part of their anatomy as well in the months and years ahead if they don't get the Medicaid expansion, if we don't do the Tennessee plan. So they're a little bit like the boy that cried wolf, and I think those of us who advocate for people are in a position to validate that now, to say, you know, we haven't always been on the same side with the hospitals, certainly on some of their charging practices, but you know, they've got a point. And we know that there are 30 counties in the state which, based just on what the finances they're reporting now annually to the state, their current financial performance, we know that there are 30 counties that are going to lose their only hospitals, or a few of them have 2 hospitals, both will close without the Tennessee plan taking effect. They may not close next year, but they are right on the edge right now. Vanderbilt here has already announced hundreds of layoffs, and those are directly tied to the fact that the Affordable Care Act is going to be taking back money, and they're not going to be getting it through the expansion. Another thing that dynamic in here is the folks that some of us find ourselves usually on the opposite side of. You know, you've got the grassroots pitted against the big boys. Well, here are the big boys: the pharmaceutical industry, the nursing home industry, the hospital industry, the for-profit hospitals, the not-for-profit hospitals, the doctors. All the ships at sea have been in favor of the Medicaid expansion because of the money. There are literally no significant registered lobbyists down at the plaza, legislative plaza, that lobbied against this, except the handful of ideologues that really don't represent any significant amount of money. And it usually, as you know, money is what makes the wheels go around at the legislature. Mayors of cities, including the Republican mayors, have said we need this for our local economy, we need it for our state budget, our local government budget. And the editorial support in the newspapers has been and continues to be quite strong in favor of us. We got everything going for us except the grassroots. What's wrong with this picture? Grassroots are us, except that there's this perception that the Tea Party, which is this grassroots insurgency, we know better. We know some of it is highly funded by right-wing zealots with billions of dollars, and some of it is fakery. But the perception is that the masses of people out there don't want this to happen. And so you saw this unusual situation where the big boys and the big money were trumped by what was seen as an insurgent grassroots movement. So what do we do now? Well, I think we have to reverse that dynamic where the grassroots lines up. We'll still have the big boys. They'll do their thing. But we've got to make sure that the grassroots at the local legislative district level are sending a signal to legislators. Here's the right thing, and you can do it and not lose your seat if you'll vote for the Tennessee plan, and we will back you up, and we urge you to do this. And so,
why have the for-profit hospitals not poured opposition money into these districts?
why have the for-profit hospitals not poured opposition money into these districts? We don't have enough time, and I don't have enough emotional resilience to talk to you about where the hospitals have been and why they didn't show up for 6 months, and when they did show up, they couldn't find their rear ends in the dark with both hands and a flashlight. The only nice way to say it is bless their hearts. They now are very concerned about it. There is going to be a renewed push. I don't think we need to worry about them now being there and working on it. It's a day late and a dollar short, but I think our task is to make sure that we collaborate with them in doing those things that they can't do. which is the genuine connecting to the people who are going to be affected. And let me just tick off that what we do. We need to educate at the local level. Talk to civic groups, talk to Sunday school groups, write letters to the editor, do op-eds, find small businesses that will stand and say, look, and we don't care what they think about President Obama, we don't care how they vote. They just need to say, look, I can't get insurance for my folks, and I need it, and this will make it affordable. Please do this. I have low-wage workers who are not going to be covered, and I want you to do this. Nurses and doctors are the best spokespeople. We need to find local nurses to speak out publicly, be quoted in local media. And we need to get the Chamber of Commerce members. Chamber of Commerce, one of the biggest of big boys, is on board. We need to get their individual members to speak out and contact their lawmakers and the governor.
Gordon, you said educate. And sometimes people don't want to learn. Sometimes people don't want to learn. Gordon emphasized educate. And I, at the level that I come from, and people that I talk to and deal with, I think it's more of a situation now, with backs up against the wall of agitate. You spoke about the Tea Party and you dared to use the term grassroots in the descriptive phrase there. We need to do true grassroots informational agitation, and that's where we're at right now.
The observation is we're not talking education, we're talking agitation, and we need to do the real grassroots out at the local level. Is that? I don't disagree with that. Call it what you will. The perception needs to be at the local level. Our community. We don't care about the world. Our community, our hospital, our people are the ones who desperately need to have this. And, it'll be done different ways by different people. One of the things I think we want to avoid is, and those of us who are concerned about this during the session grapple with this a lot, is this can't be a partisan issue. We frankly want Democrats to kind of be quiet about it, to talk quietly, but this is an intra-family deal with the Republican Party. And if the Democrats come out, and if we make it a Democratic issue, or if we make it an Obama issue, if we make it a loyalty to larger political goals issue, it makes it harder for Republicans to vote the right way. So we have to be, I say that only by way of about the agitation, because some of us have agitated and we've been in people's face over the years. I think this calls for some subtlety about understanding the dynamics. The Democrats are a spent force. I mean, they're probably not even going to run a gubernatorial candidate, a Senate candidate. This is all about a family quarrel among the Republicans. So we just need to be real careful and understand that's where we are.
And maybe we could potentially reframe the approach in terms of not even it being an intra-family Republican squabble. Maybe we should just drop those terms, Democrat, Republican, Tea Party, and just call, excuse my French, a spade, and proceed forward that way. At least in terms of vocabulary, the language that we use should be, of course, consistent, but also basically it's a human issue.
Exactly. It's a human issue. It's not a political issue. We know it's a political issue, but if it's framed in political terms, we lose. It's got to be framed as a human issue. I want to, if we can hold off, because I want to make sure you hear from John. But I just want to close with, we are now getting requests from the big boys who kept us at arm's length until now, saying, please don't screw this up. You know, we know how to spend money. We know how to influence votes. We're going to get this done, and just please don't give us any help. Well, now we are where we are. And some of us find ourselves getting calls from big boys saying, those folks that we're talking about, those poor people, you know some of them, right? Can you find some for us so we can put a human interest face on this issue? And that's what we do well. That's who we know. We know the folks who are out there who are affected by this, and we need to bring this home. I think at the Tennessee Justice Center website, we've got a series of fact sheets that we put out. One of them I think is most effective. Just looks at the income levels that we're talking about and compares that to typical wages, average wages, Department of Labor statistics about the average wages of retail workers, wait staff in restaurants, cook staff in restaurants, people who work in sawmills and construction, folks that people can relate to. That's who we're talking about. These are overwhelmingly working families that we're talking about. We need to bring that home to folks. So that's, I think our way ahead is, our role is pretty clear. The big boys are going to be the big boys. God bless them. Let them do their thing. We need to make sure that at the grassroots level, we're identifying the folks who will be affected, make sure they understand that this is good. Many of them don't. And then give them voices, sometimes directly, sometimes through nurses, doctors, ourselves, other spokespeople, to put that face on, this is truly a human issue. It can't be just a partisan issue or we lose. I'm going to turn it over to John at this point.
Thanks, Gordon. So this is great. This tees up what I'm going to say nicely. And I'll try to keep mine fairly brief, so I know there's a lot of questions here, so I won't filibuster the remaining time here. So what I'm going to talk about today is really what I'd like to do is offer a few remarks on kind of three fundamental points, which I think help us tie together the issue of Medicaid expansion or the Tennessee plan to the broader issue of how we reform the healthcare system. And those 3 points have to do with, one, why coverage reform was imperative and a very large part of the Affordable Care Act. Second, how it fits into the broader efforts, like I said, to reform the delivery system. And third, why in particular I think, and I'm a very strong believer of this, the Arkansas or Tennessee plan in particular can address the fundamental issues that we need to accomplish with coverage reform. So, in terms of the case for expanding coverage, so if you think about the Affordable Care Act, it spends about $1.2 trillion. The vast majority of that money is being spent to expand coverage. And the way I like to characterize the Affordable Care Act to various audiences I speak to is that it spends a lot of money on coverage and invests a lot of money in the delivery system reform. And what I mean by that is it spends almost $1 trillion on coverage expansion. Why is that important? It's important because if you look at the health insurance system today in the United States, it's very fragmented, and it's characterized by disruptive and very costly turnover in health insurance coverage among the non-elderly population. So the fact that we have 50 million people who are uninsured in the United States on any given day is really just a reflection of these incredible dynamics that we're seeing in the health insurance system. As people gain and lose jobs, they go in and out of health insurance over time, and it's incredibly disruptive not only to them and confusing in terms of knowing where their providers, or if their providers are still in network or out of network, whether they can afford a plan if they go uninsured for a few months. And so the fundamental question that coverage reform is trying to answer is, can we restructure the incentives of an insurance system so that they're more aligned with what we're trying to do, or can they work in tandem with what we're trying to do on the delivery system side? That is, can we reorient a private health insurance system that to date, by necessity, has been incentivized to avoid people with healthcare risk, and re-incentivize them by offering people continuous options of coverage outside the workplace, re-incentivize them to bet so that they're competing better on dimensions in terms of how well they're coordinating and managing that risk, rather than just avoiding it altogether. And so, how did we get to this system that we're living with today, where we have all these people uninsured in the United States? Well, we, as you know, have a predominantly employer-based system in the United States, but if you can't get coverage through your employer, maybe they just don't offer it to you at all, you just can't afford it, you might be able to get Medicaid if you're in certain groups, like if you're a pregnant woman or disabled, but by and large, people with low incomes that don't have kids or don't fall into the kind of traditional categories of Medicaid are left to the whims of a non-group private insurance market available to them outside the workplace. And so many of these people either just get priced out of coverage or they're denied coverage altogether and they go uninsured. And when they show up to the hospital provides care to them or their provider, their doctor, but it's largely uncompensated. But one of the key goals of health insurance coverage is that it provides not only the ability to access providers at an affordable cost, but it also provides really key financial protection for people. And we're seeing this in a lot of research now. When you give people health insurance coverage, their rates of depression go down, their overall well-being is increased, even if their kind of objective physical health doesn't change at all when you give them insurance. So the way that we've been financing care for the uninsured to date has been largely through the uncompensated care system, which Gordon spoke about earlier. And this is a form of financial protection, but only on the provider side. It gives them some means to provide this care and be reimbursed for it. But on the patient side, they still have nothing. There's no financial protection for them. They're waiting until they need care, and they're going in, and it's very expensive. And the provider is getting reimbursed to some extent for that, but now those dollars are going down, and they have to be made up somewhere if they're going to continue to provide even at the level that they're providing today. So without any kind of coverage expansion to people under poverty, as Gordon said, if Tennessee doesn't go forward with its plan, there's literally nothing available to people as their incomes fall under the poverty line, unless they're an immigrant, in which case there is actually coverage available to them. And what this does not only is continue the system that we're living in today, where there's so much insecurity, financial insecurity and health insecurity among this population, but it's going to produce confusion for people. Maybe they're working, they're low income, they're eligible for the exchange 1 month, but they go to part-time either on their own or because their employer switches them to part-time, their income falls, and all of a sudden they're not eligible for anything because their family income dropped below poverty. And so it's going to be enormously confusing to people to know on a month-to-month basis whether they're actually eligible for coverage or not. And as I said, the state is going to continue to, if without expansion of some sort, the state is going to continue to rely on uncompensated care. Well, it turns out that about a third of uncompensated care provided in the United States is actually provided by state and local governments. So the deal, as Gordon said, was that we were going to expand coverage and get this kind of dedicated financing and insurance for people under poverty that don't have it today. And in return for that, the hospitals could shift off of uncompensated care because it's now being paid for by Medicaid or an insurance exchange. Well, all of those uncompensated care cuts are still going forward, but if you're in a state that isn't expanding Medicaid, those people that were using uncompensated care aren't getting covered. And so we're seeing this now, what's happening across Tennessee and other states where hospitals are thinking about cutbacks. We've seen it at Vanderbilt. We provide $40 million a year in uncompensated care. You're going to see reductions in service and the level of uncompensated care, and it's going to put enormous pressures on state and local uncompensated care programs to fill in the gaps when even those programs are really struggling for funds to begin with. And so what we can do with a plan like Tennessee is address these two things in the sense that by expanding the Tennessee plan, which would basically give people exchange coverage, so it would create a kind of continuous source of coverage as through the income distribution. That is, when you hit 100% of poverty, you're not switched back and forth between Medicaid and exchange, which people have been really concerned about. It's this issue called churn, where people one month might be eligible for one thing and another month might be eligible for something. And Brian Hale, who spoke earlier, has been really forceful thought leader on how do we address churn in the system. He's a really national thought leader on these things. But what Medicaid expansion will do is give people a stable and predictable source of coverage. And I just want to put some numbers around what we're talking about here. So if you look at somebody on Medicaid today, or if you look at the population who's covered by Medicaid today, within 12 months, 1/3 of those people will become uninsured. If you look at people who have private coverage today, within 2 years, 1 out of 6 of them will be uninsured. So if you look over a 2-year period, about 40% of people under the age 65 in the United States will be uninsured. That's a huge number. It's much larger than the 15 or 16% or so that are uninsured on any given day. So this is what I mean by this just tremendous and disruptive amount of turnover in the system. And so, how am I on time, by the way? Okay. So what the Tennessee plan does, again, we want to reorient the incentives of an insurance system so that they work synergistically with what we're trying to do on the delivery side. If you have 40% of the people going in and out of coverage all the time, how in the world can their plans work with them to manage their healthcare needs, etc.? So how can we have enough traction on the delivery system side of reform when people are just moving in and out of coverage over time? And that's also the issue that the Tennessee plan in particular addresses, which is this issue I brought up of churn. If you have a system where there's a cliff at 100% of poverty and people go from Medicaid to the exchange, it's confusing for them and it's administratively costly, and you have people just, in some sense you haven't really addressed this fundamental issue, which is all the amount of turnover. And what the Tennessee and Arkansas plan does is basically put everybody in the same pool so that as your income changes, your coverage doesn't change too. And I think that's really, really important. And it's a reason why I'm very supportive of plans like the Tennessee plan and the Bridge plan that Brian Hale put together when he was at TennCare. I think that these type of coverage reforms are completely necessary for leveraging the type of delivery system reforms. Like I said, the ACA invests a lot in delivery system reform, but if there's no fertile ground for it to have traction in, it's not going to work. And if we have so many people coming in and out of coverage and confused over time, that it's just, there's less of an opportunity to allow all the really cool, innovative demonstration projects on the delivery system side to take hold. So I think I'll stop there and just take questions here, and I guess Gordon as well.
My question is, we're waiting to hear back about whether we're going to get a waiver or not. And we're talking a lot about what to do to get the Tennessee plan in place. What's going to happen if the waiver is rejected? Where are we?
By HHS? I think you could probably speak better. The question is, what happens if the waiver that Tennessee has submitted is rejected?
And first I would say we have not submitted a waiver. It's hard to get rejected when you haven't submitted one. It's hard to get approved when you haven't submitted one. And frankly, there are cynics that say, I had a Republican lobbyist tell me he thought it was brilliant what the governor did politically, because he refused the Medicaid expansion, so he made all the Tea Party folks happy, but then he had this disgruntled group of big boys that wanted something done to get the money, and he said, a wish and a promise, we're going to get this, but it all depends on Obama giving us flexibility. And then he loaded it with some stuff he knew that they could not legally approve, and he can turn at the end of, whenever and say, gee golly, I would have done this good thing for you, except that the guy that we all hate so much wouldn't give me the flexibility. That's the cynical view. I've talked to many people who know the governor, say he's not cynical, he genuinely wants to do it, he's compassionate. I don't know. I just know that we haven't submitted a waiver. What we hear at the federal level is that, periodically there's statements out of administration that, we're working with the White House, we're working with Secretary Sebelius. They get a call about every 3 weeks kind of saying, yo, what's up? We're talking about complex, I mean, Arkansas, they've been working it, because there's no question both parties want it to happen. So I think partly our task is to make sure the governor, in a very nice, polite way, understands there's a constituency for his plan. We expect him to deliver on it, and we're going to be there to help make sure that the votes at the local district level materialize. So I'm not worried about it being turned down. I am worried about us never getting around to applying for it, or not applying for it in a form that everybody knows and that the feds have said very clearly for months now has to be in a certain form in order for it to be approved. So we've got two motivational tasks. I'm not worried about the federal level, except to the extent that it might be used as an excuse for not doing the heavy lifting at the state level.
So I'll just add, I think there's kind of three fundamental issues that we have to address with this Tennessee option. One is, again, going back to my point, we have to provide continuity and coverage to people. I think that's really important. Once we do that, we have to address two other things, which is the benefit level and the appropriate level of subsidy for people. So what benefits are covered by the plans that we're expanding to them, and are we giving them enough so that it's actually affordable to them? The Tennessee plan seemed to be hung up on the benefit side of things. The affordability or subsidy level is really fixed by federal law, so that's going to be an act of Congress to change something like that, unless states want to kick in extra money. But I think, which is not going to happen. But I think those are the three kind of fundamental issues, and there's going to be a really necessary ideological debate over what, once we can get people covered, because I think that's vitally important by something, just something, then we can have a debate over what the appropriate benefit level and level of subsidy should be. Yeah.
Yes, it seems like it is possible to use the term working poor
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about a lot of the Medicaid recipients and the Medicaid expansion recipients, and that's probably, it's a good face, it's accurate, and it's a good political face, and it's accurate once again. Somehow that the working part got left out, and so many of those people, unless you want to correct me, that's who they are.
Yeah.
That's absolutely right. And again, I would go to our Tennessee Justice Center website, find the fact sheet where we break out and shows here are the occupations, and there are folks that you see every day in your life.
What website?
Tennessee Justice Center. Just Google Tennessee Justice Center, and there's a tab for resources, then Affordable Care Act, and you'll see fact sheets there.
If I understand the Arkansas plan that Governor Biden done, he's agreed to do the Medicare and Medicaid systems guidelines, which is $4 copay for office visit, $4 copay on prescription, and a $75 copay on if Tennessee did something like that, they would still bring in lots of money from the so-called working poor and uninsured at the poverty level.
Yes, ma'am. If we accept,
This one over here is having trouble hearing the questions before.
okay, the question is that the Arkansas plan would accept Medicaid. Medicaid currently permits cost sharing, but it puts limits on it, and such as $4 for an outpatient visit, $75 for hospital stay, and Arkansas is accepting that. Why can't we do that? And the answer is we could do that. It would be real skin in the game. If you don't have money and you have to come up with $75, that's a big deal. It's not as if Medicaid is a free ride. What the governor's wanting to charge is a good bit more than that. And so if we will accept the Medicaid levels of cost sharing, there will be real skin in the game, and we will get federal approval. We are not going to get federal approval at the higher levels.
You mentioned that federal funding would be at 100% for 3 years, and then in the fourth year it would go down to 90%. What happens after that?
In the fourth year, it's 95%. The question is what's the scale down of the federal match? It goes down to 90% by 2019. It's like 93%, and then I think 90%. And it stays at 90% thereafter. We've done, Chris Coleman at the Tennessee Justice Center, and who's the very involved in the healthcare campaign, did the math, looked at, we charge taxes as a state on the managed care organizations, HMOs that administer TennCare. Every dollar that comes in would go through the HMOs, if we were doing the Medicaid expansion at least. 5.5%, we'd get 5.5%. So this is a cash cow for the first 3 years. It's not that it's free, it's actually generating money. We will continue to generate those tax revenues versus, in addition, we'll be charging taxes on hospitals, 4.5%. And that's before you get to the more subtle and sophisticated economic analyses that look at the multiplier effect of that money coursing through the economy, turning over, generating sales tax, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a, even in the out years of 90% federal funding, this is still a great deal for the states. Now, I realized suddenly, I had a chill about 15 seconds ago. I realized I'm standing next to a bona fide economist. And I'm thinking, geez, don't call me out on this if I got that wrong.
Let's go this side.
Since we have a TennCare system that has NCOs in charge of our Medicaid, for the overwhelming majority of Medicaid patients, in essence, we already have the Tennessee plan on our Medicaid plan.
Please cut off the mics. Shut that woman up, okay?
Except for the safeguards. So if the governor gives in on safeguards.
This is a secret that is not to leave this room, okay? When the governor says, hey, I've got this bold new idea, instead of covering people through Medicaid, we're going to put them into private insurance plans. Guess what TennCare does? Every single TennCare enrollee is enrolled in a private insurance plan. Yes. But we're not going to say that because that might make it sound like the Tennessee plan is not the innovative, bold, exciting private thing that we all are going to go out of this room cheering for.
The governor's Tennessee plan versus the TennCare Tennessee plan is going to cover half the people, right? It's not going to cover the full 300,000 that Medicaid covers. It's only going to cover 150 because it's going to be more expensive.
Can I speak to that?
Yeah, the question is, the Tennessee plan won't cover as many people. Just a quick technical thing. You'll see numbers all over the place about, would the Medicaid expansion reach 330,000 people? Would it reach 181,000? Would it reach, the governor's saying the Tennessee plan will cover 175,000. I don't think, those are really just estimates about how many people. We know there are 330,000 people below 138% of poverty in the state. And just put that in real world, 138% of poverty is around $32,000, $33,000 for a family of four. We know there are 330,000 of those folks. We don't know how many of them are already eligible under current rules but not insured. And by the way, that was a slide I didn't do. We need to be doing outreach. You're going to hear a lot more about outreach and assisting people to enroll. Without the Tennessee plan, there's still going to be some people who will qualify under current rules that have just never signed up. So really redoubling our outreach efforts to get people the benefits they need can help them. And the other thing, of course, is we can't help them. We need to be telling their stories. But I don't think the Tennessee plan is going to cover fewer people. It's just a function of what you estimate the take-up rate will be. So that really segues nicely to the rest of the things we're going to be talking about today, which is doing the outreach, doing the enrollment, getting people signed up. Is that the hook?
That's the hook.
Okay.